Mike, welcome. Nice having you be part of our interview process. Uh, Pleasure having you here. And just wanted you just check to see how your audio is. And
Okay.
there you go.
Yeah.
Sound good.
You guys are coming in great.
Okay.
Thank
Wonderful. Mike, I guess I'll start with just
Okay.
kind of a general question
Sure.
in terms of, you've been involved in county council and working in politics. Your father's been involved. It's been a real family thing.
Actually, my uncle. Yeah.
Your uncle.
I actually had two uncles and a cousin, believe it or not, in the 60s and 70s.
So, with all this background and all these different things that you've been involved in, what are the thing that is your most proudest accomplishment, the thing that you feel that you've made some real progress in terms of your contribution to our community? What really stands out for you?
Well, the one that I get asked a lot about, even till today, is the plastic bag reduction ban, because I guess we were the first county in the state to do this. We came under a lot of criticism, and although people don't perceive me as an environmentalist, I do have that environmental side to me, and that really resonated well, I think, and it's still talked about today. So I would list that as one of my, top accomplishments. Another one would be the creation of the Affordable Housing Fund, which is now being tapped into for various affordable housing projects. And that was done back in, I think, 2006 or 2007. And I think between those two, I would put it up there as two of my more memorable accomplishments, but also the first-time home buyers fund. So I've been trying to look for balance, environment, and the need for affordable housing. I've using those platforms, I've always believed in those two platforms as the highest priority. And of course, funding for public safety and infrastructure as well.
So there's certainly been, a lot of needs for affordable housing, and certainly there's going to be a huge shift happening in the housing market in terms of our vacation rentals, short-term rentals, and how are you, as part of the county council, looking at shifting some of the housing stock to help our residents?
Well, I think what we just did during the budget session, we did increase the rates for short-term rental owners. I've heard that there is a movement to try and totally eliminate short-term rentals. I'm currently not for that. I think there is a niche market for it. I am supportive of caps, keeping it, limiting the amount of permits to be allowed for that. But I'm looking also at the possibility of giving tax exemptions for those who do long-term rentals to help, maybe motivate people who are in short-term. If you don't like paying the higher tax rate, well, if you go and rent out long-term, you'll pay a lower tax rate and maybe get some exemptions or some tax relief. I think that's what one way to motivate someone to shift going from short-term to renting long-term, because the demand is still there. And hopefully, well, with the economy, of course, the dynamics have changed a little bit.
What type of change would we look at in terms of taxation for people who then switch over and say, okay, I want to have it so that this is affordable long-term rental for our community? What type of tax break could they expect?
Oh, well, let's say, I guess maybe a break in property taxes. That could be one. I'm not fully explored the mechanics of how to do that, but it will be like getting an exemption or breaks or relief if you do something that's of greater need to the community. So that's something I'm still exploring. I've just thought about it broadly, but haven't looked at the mechanics. But like my plastic bag ordinance and affordable housing fund and first-time home buyers fund, we looked at other communities, and we seem to always target California. So California seems to be the one state where there's a lot of, breaking, what's that term? Not technology, but legislation, innovative legislation, as I like to call it. So I like to look at other communities to see what they have. So I'll explore other communities to see what type of tax relief they can give to long-term property
Great.
owners.
Thank you for that, Mike. And
Thank
Sylvia, why don't you go next, and then we'll have.
Aloha, Mike. How are you doing?
No
What is
problem.
the way forward for Maui, economically speaking, from here?
Well, I think now with COVID-19, we have no choice but to diversify our economy. We have to look at branding tourism a different way. Um, I, for one, would like to not only continue promoting more ecotourism, but more holistic tourism, educating the visitor as well, and not how tourism to Maui has been marketed with, cheap airfares. Come to Maui, and it seems like Maui has been, or Hawaii in general, has been turned into a Disneyland, so to speak, and a free-for-all with less emphasis on the respect and cultural aspects of the islands. The way I would like Maui to be viewed is, if you were to go to the Vatican in Rome, for example, you wouldn't go over there to have wild parties and that kind of nature. I want visitors to come here and respect and sort of look at Maui County as a place of reverence, a place of holistic healing, and more along those lines. And I think maybe we need to be very selective when it comes to tourism. And again, we need to diversify. I was just talking about it today in one of our meetings. I think we need to, instead of growing tourism, we need to grow our healthcare professionals here. I think a couple of weeks ago, UH Manoa started offering some classes for pre-med classes here on Maui. So, we're living longer. Healthcare is always a big topic. Why not grow our young professionals here? Could save some expenses from our kids having to go to the mainland or elsewhere, and work with, develop some public and private partnerships to do that. So we could be known as a place where education is emphasized, and especially in terms of growing our healthcare professionals. So those are just some of the ideas I've thought about. But yeah, we need to shift our whole focus on what our economy base will be, because tourism, we can't totally, it's different now. Times have certainly changed. Tourism will never reach the levels it once had, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting idea I hadn't heard of or thought of before, is that this could be quite a draw for education.
Mm-hmm.
People could come here. That's a great idea. What was I just thinking? We've been asking so many questions to so many candidates.
You guys have had a long day.
That's right. But it'll come back to me. Yeah. So when you come here, what the tourists don't get when they come here, maybe they go to a nice hotel, hopefully, or something like that. But if you live here, you look around and think, wow, there's not a lot of infrastructure in this state. You think of, Hawaii should be this, really rich, well cared for state, and it's quite the opposite. And there's always, complaining about the budget and stuff, but this seems to be, to me, like, what the New Deal was during the Great Depression, is that they invested in, things that the public, parks,
Mm-hmm.
things that the public could enjoy, and infrastructure. And obviously we need a lot of help with our injection well system.
Yep.
So many things about our infrastructure.
Right. Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because as it goes infrastructure, I think less emphasis was placed on that by our county forefathers and foremothers years ago. Less emphasis on really on planning really well. And I guess, to be fair, maybe the planning concepts were different back then, but we've learned a lot over these, X amount of years to do better planning. My daughter went to school in Minnesota, and she came back and told me, Dad, the planning is just incredible up there, very progressive state. So that's why I like looking at other communities to see what kind of ideas we can apply to Maui that will fit.
Yeah, anything specific there?
Well, I think in general, I think we need to, one, we need affordable housing, but in my case, I do things on a case-by-case basis. I mean, I have to also take into consideration the impacts on the neighborhood, traffic, the infrastructure. If the project has appropriate infrastructure to support it. So it's that kind of planning. So now we have to be selective. I know developers complain that the process takes too long, but we have a limited amount of land, and we have to, while we consider development, we have to protect our resources, and minimize the impacts to our environment. So I think that's one example of planning for me, and we shouldn't just rush into things.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks, Sylvia.
Bruce, you're next. Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay. Aloha, Mike.
Hey, aloha, Bruce.
Greetings. I was pleased to see the county manager system moving forward. Mm-hmm. Were you happy with what the result was, or were there some things you would have changed, upgraded, or deleted?
No, I think when we had Mark Hyde there, Mark made the adjustments to some of the concerns that the members had. And in my case, I felt comfortable with putting it on the ballot. So a lot of work went into it, and I just felt it was time. And I know some members may have had motives to stall it and bury it, and I'm not like that. If I feel something is ready and it's something that the public should decide, let's have the people decide. I mean, to me, it shouldn't just be left in the hands of 9 individuals. Changing the whole plan or format of government should be a decision made by the public as a whole.
And in that same vein, would you support term limits, removing the word consecutive in the 4 term limits, so that a candidate would be on for 4 terms, that's it, not just sit out for 1 term and come back?
Okay, well, whatever the people decide, I won't oppose it. Of course, for me, it didn't apply to me. Just, well, I did my 5 terms, then sat out, and I know, I guess, you have one side of the community that says sometimes you have people in there that are entrenched for too long. And some say it can be a good thing if you have an effective legislator, but if you have someone that's, I guess, become too lackadaisical, they're consumed with power, sometimes they tend to forget what got them there. If you ask me, I'd support term limits for congressional seats as well. Get these senators up there for 40, 50 years,
Would you support term limits for county council members?
Yeah, I would. I believe Tasha had something where it was 2 4-year terms, I think it was. And that may be a possible charter amendment. But then we got the Charter Commission coming up next year as well. So that's something they should certainly consider.
Okay, and another charter amendment I want to ask about is district voting. Right now, a candidate has to vote in the island-wide, which is a big economic burden for people. You have to have economics to be able to campaign in all districts. Would you vote? Would you support district voting, whether it be 9 individual districts or the 3 districts with 3 members each?
Well, that's an interesting question, Bruce, because I guess I'm accustomed to going countywide. But if you ask me for the sake of practicality and campaign expenses, I would go for district voting. I mean, it's a lot easier to just focus on a district. I guess the one argument that I've heard for the council seats being countywide is you're accountable to everybody. Sometimes with district voting, you have members that will just fight more only for their district. Whereas if you're subject to being voted on by people in Molokai or Lanai, you have to be very mindful of their needs. So I'm great with it either or.
Well, we have a situation where many of the council members didn't even win their own district they came from.
Yeah.
So that kind of defeats that whole concept.
Yeah.
Are you into looking at that concept again? And
Sure. And yeah, that happens. Without naming names, I know some council members, as you know, they lose their districts, but they get all their votes from elsewhere. I think I might have lost my, if you combine the 3 communities in my district, I may have lost overall too. So, but again, if it's something the public, if that will be put on a charter amendment and the public supports it, I won't oppose it. I take a neutral stance on it and let it go. Because I see arguments, good arguments on both sides.
Right. And what is your solution for the affordable housing problem that we're in? What would you, if you had the choice to make, how would you move forward to solve that problem?
Well, I know I've put out legislation, for example, as I mentioned to Paul earlier, the Affordable Housing Fund, First-Time Home Buyers Fund. The state's 201H process requires developers to just provide 51% of their total units to be affordable. I'm pushing to increase that to 75%. So the developers committed to giving more because they get a lot of exemptions using the 201H process. So that's one form of legislation I would, support in order to provide more affordables. And there's something else on my mind on that. Something that's cooking in a pot right now that I'm thinking. And forgive me, because there are times when I get all these ideas and I'll just say, let's put it out there. Let's get it out there for discussion. As I was mentioning earlier, I forget what community I looked at. It was probably in California again. And it had something to do with, increasing the amount of affordable housing. But at the same time, what we have is the Show Me the Water bill, which I think places a lot of accountability on the developer to come up with a water source for their project. Now, if it was a 100% affordable housing project, I would support having them exempt, because currently they're not. Even if you have a 100% affordable housing project, you're subject to the Show Me the Water bill. Now, if you provide them an exemption, then you may have developers that are more motivated to do 100%. But we also shouldn't exempt with the county projects. We're not subject to that. I think we should subject ourselves to that. I mean, water is water, no matter what type of project you're going to build, whether it be government or private development.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
And I still support the Show Me the Water bill.
Fantastic.
Okay. Thanks, Bruce.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass it on to the next interviewer.
Okay.
Daniel, you're next.
Aloha, Mike. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, aloha, Daniel.
Yeah, I know that you've been in the office
my pleasure.
the past 2 years now. So this question in particular has been most interesting to those who have been in the office. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you now. So as a public representative, it is a duty to face the truth and to act righteously. These islands reflect the lowest voter turnout in the United States. On May 15th, 2019, Dr. David Keanu Sai gave a presentation to the Maui County Council, evidencing the illegal overthrow of Queen Liliuokalani in 1893 and showing clear violation of domestic and international law with the ongoing illegal United States military occupation of the Kingdom of the Hawaiian Islands. As a candidate for public representation, how do you rectify handling the truth of Dr. Sai's presentation, as well as the works of the Ko Hawaii Paia office in Hilo, Keeaumoku Kapu, Henry Noah, Amelia Gora, Pampi Kanahele, Leon Siu, Dr. Desaias, Madame Ruth Bolame, etc.? How do you rectify the compliance of the law in restoration of occupied lands?
Good question, and certainly an all-star list of Hawaiian scholars. I think it's high time we can't keep turning our backs or dodging, the concerns. I believe President Clinton back in the 90s, apologized, acknowledged so a wrong was done. So I think we still need to keep working with each other and move forward rather than keep looking back. And I think what must happen first, too, you have a lot of Hawaiian factions that still have disagreements and fighting. I think we need to resolve it on that level first, but at the same time still recognize the wrongs and work with government. And depending on who you have in public office, you need leaders that are receptive to the cause and to recognize the wrongs that were done and the sharing of ideas like Dr. Sai has with us. And it's interesting because I look at Dr. Sai's background. He served in the United States military. And of course, there's many people that still today do not recognize the United States government. So he's had a good perspective on both sides of the issue. So certainly with what Dr. Sai had to say, I was pretty locked in. So I think it starts with that. On my previous tenure on the council, I had Mr. Noah and the Lawful Kingdom of the Hawaiian government do a presentation. So I think it has to start there. Elected officials need to be educated because there are some out there who may not have the understanding and background of the whole history. And I'm still learning, and I was born and raised here, and I am part Hawaiian too. So for me, it's an educational experience. And I used to be a public school teacher, and I taught civics. And the one thing I was impressed upon my students is when you read a textbook, understand who the authors were. If you have an author, some authors may have a Western point of view, and other authors may have the point of view of the conquered. So it's much like Native American history, and I tell my kids, weigh both. Don't only go with one perspective. Understand both perspectives, and you make your own decision after.
Great, mahalo.
I hope that answered your question. Sorry, Dan.
Oh,
Good question.
Good. Very good. Yeah, thank you for your insightful answer. And I'll pass the question on to the next, and I'll come back to you.
Hi, Mike. My question that I have is, the first one is around our water resources. Really, it's a question that I've been asking all of the different representatives going for different offices. And when you support the county asserting eminent domain over the EMI system in order to administer the public trust water resources for food security necessary for our community.
Yes. It's just been my personal opinion that any large water resources should be the domain of government, with government oversight rather than private oversight. I see the EMI purchase as something also using their tunnels potentially for drought-prone areas on Maui as well. Now that we don't have sugarcane or large-scale use of the water, these waters again could be used to fill back the streams and get our ecosystems back to what it once was on the East Maui side, kalo farming and so forth. And the only thing that I would be wary of is to make sure that whatever we're buying, as far as the infrastructure, that we don't overpay for it, so to speak. So we need to carefully negotiate, make sure we don't buy a white elephant. But the bottom line, I'm in support of getting the water resource. I think it would be a real benefit for Maui County.
Great. Yes, thank you for that, Mike, because obviously it is a huge issue around the types of crops we grow, where we grow the crops, and where our development occurs. Yeah. So it's essential.
And also, if we're looking at establishing sustainable farming for traditional and organic, I mean, there's another water source that can be used as well. So, yeah, and that's, again, part of diversifying our economy. We have to move in a different direction to sustain ourselves. And also, at the same time, we can market our homegrown products here as well.
So in a similar vein, when we look at then our utilities for electricity, and look at what we're paying right now. I mean, with MECO, we're paying one of the highest rates in the nation. And if we compare that to Kauai, they're really paying one of the lowest rates in the nation. And the difference is that they are a publicly owned and operated cooperative. And here we have a private corporation then that is overseeing our electricity distribution and generation. So where would you stand in terms of moving towards the way Kauai is actually utilizing?
Okay, anything for lower rates, I'm certainly open to that. I think we should look at the Kauai model and move forward and lessen our reliance on petroleum fuel, on top of, photovoltaics and solar panels and all of that. But yeah, I've always appreciated the Kauai model, the co-op, and it's been working for years, so maybe Maui should consider it.
Great. Thank you. And I'll pass that on. Sylvia, you're next, and then Bruce.
Thanks, Mike. What do you think about what Maui is facing as far as climate change and sea level rise? Is there any clear way forward with that one?
Well, I think what we did on the council, I'm chair of the Governance and Ethics and Transparency Committee, and I pushed through the legislation to hire special counsel for litigation against all of the oil companies and so forth related to the impacts of climate change. And that was introduced by Kelly, but I worked with Kelly and made sure, hey, let's get this on the docket quick. Let's get it out there. So, I've supported hiring special counsel to be part of a larger group to go after the large oil companies and get some type of restitution back because of the impacts of climate change. And it's interesting you mentioned that because there's been talk about establishing more reservoirs and storage systems for Maui County in times of drought. But I think we need to address the climate change issue first because of changing weather patterns, because it could be moot. If it's not going to rain, well, we need to address climate change. And of course, the effects on shoreline erosion as well. So that's something I'm certainly interested in addressing as well.
Wow, that's interesting. Do you think there's really a chance that we could win a lawsuit against the oil companies and then be able to rebuild Maui? Is that a
Well,
possibility?
well, I'm presuming this is a multi-state lawsuit, so I'm sure they're going to give us something, but it may not be the amount we want. But it's a start to at least offset our costs for having to, for example, if the shoreline erosion, we have our roads falling into the water. There's a cost to moving roads inland, so at least the monies we get from these oil companies could offset our costs for the damaged infrastructure.
Well, thank you for that. That sounds somewhat hopeful.
Yeah.
And there was an issue about another topic. There was an issue about the corporate counsel, that the Maui County Council didn't necessarily feel that the lawyers provided to them were on their side and representing them. How is that working out? Is that still on the table to get your own representation, legal representation?
I believe it still is right now to get basically our own attorneys. We do have attorneys in the Office of Counsel Services, but they primarily yield currently to the Corporation Counsel as our lead attorneys to represent us. And I believe it may have been Kelly or Kiani that's been pushing for us to have our own attorneys because of, I guess, the perceived distrust between council members and Corporation Counsel. I mean, there's a major disagreement if you look at the Lahaina injection well matter. The council disagreed with corporation. The majority of the council members disagreed with Corporation Counsel to take it to the Supreme Court. Okay, the vote passes, but the mayor and Corporation Counsel still pursued taking the matter to the Supreme Court. And look what happened. You know, those of us who supported not taking it to the Supreme Court, we did the right thing in siding with the Earth Justice and Hawaii Wildlife Fund. So now I think because the Supreme Court ruled on this now, I think it might make it even tougher for us to address the maybe more requirements and costs if we just settled initially. And I guess Corp Counsel didn't see it our way. So that may be one reason why there's this, you know, movement to, hey, let's get our own special or corporate version of Corporation Counsel for us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your vote on that issue. Most of us did see it the way that you saw it. What do you think is the way forward for treating our wastewater?
Well, that's one thing on my docket this next term, if I'm back, is you know, using a recycled wastewater. One, we need to build transmission lines, like for example, out of the Lahaina wastewater facility. I think there's great potential for that. You know, instead of injecting this water back into the ocean, let's use it. So initially, there's going to be a cost to establish the transmission lines, but I think over the long haul, it'll be well worth it. So that's something I'm in favor of. Upcountry, I'm hopeful one day to get our own wastewater treatment plant in upcountry, so there's less reliance on cesspools and the like. So those are some two long-term goals I have that I would support.
Okay, any other big goals that you have for this next term?
Oh, let's see. I mentioned the 201H Affordable Housing Fund. I've been doing a lot in the budget, especially for our district. You know, a lot of public safety improvements. The North Shore Greenway, I'm looking at see if that can be expanded out past Kuau. You know, establish bike paths out there from, you know, that could take you from Paia through Haiku. Also fixing up the existing parking lot in Paia. Haiku, the purchase of the lands out in Peahi. I think those are important, and working with for example, the Haiku Community Association. So there's a lot of things that may seem small, but when you add them all up, it'll be big for the community. And of course, the continued affordable housing issue, but while at the same time trying to jumpstart our economy again, but moving in a different direction. Because you know, as far as tourism goes, I think we have to market ourselves differently and be very selective as how we want to approach this type of industry.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank
Paul?
you.
I just had just a follow-on question to what Sylvia was talking about. When you were looking at then the issue of hiring outside special counsel versus reliance on corporate counsel, how did you vote in that situation?
Did we take, I'm not sure if we took that vote. Did we take that vote on the hiring of special counsel?
I believe there was a vote for
There was a
that.
vote on that.
Yeah.
Did I vote for that? Yeah, I know Kiani has a proposed charter amendment that would, as far as firing special counsel, but boy, Paul, I'm sorry. I guess I honestly can't.
Let me just ask this a simple question then.
Yeah.
Would you support then having outside
Yeah.
special counsel?
Yep, I would support it,
Very good.
regardless of the cost. Well, within reason cost, but because of what has happened, I think it may be high time for us to consider us getting our own counsel. I'm not sure if that's something we may have to do as a charter amendment, but either or, if it's just an ordinance change, I'd support it.
Great. Thank you for that. And Bruce, you're next, and then
yes, at the beginning of the last council session, there was talk about making the voting records available to easily accessible to the community. And right now, there's no website or place where we can actually easily see how everybody voted. You have to go through the transcripts. Where are we at with that, and what can you do to move that forward?
Well, I'm not the most technologically inclined person, but in general, I'm for transparency. Anything to make it easier for the public to gain access to records, I'm all for. I think we've taken steps in the last year or two with the development of the Granicus program, where I think things have become a little bit easier for the public to get accessibility to records. Now, as far as voting records, you know, I'm supportive of buying the technology or tools needed to make it easier for the public to have access. Yeah, I'm supportive. I mean, it's all about transparency.
And what are your ideas of how to deal with the unsheltered and homeless situation in Maui?
Well, I'm open to tiny homes. You know, and of course, you're going to have a segment of the homeless that don't want, they like living the way they do. So you won't be able to catch everybody, but if you can catch a lot of them, it's progress, especially the working homeless. So tiny homes, transitional housing. But I think we need to get, hopefully we can get a lot of federal help on that, federal, state help, on top of, you know, what we're doing on the council. But again, working with a lot with faith-based groups, nonprofits like MEO, you're going to have a lot of different entities coming together with government. So it'll always be a work in progress. It's like crime. I don't think you'll totally eliminate crime, but if you can reduce, you know, the homeless, it'll help the community and turn a lot of these guys, you know, make them productive members of our community. So it starts with having a home.
And what are your short-term ideas? You talked about long-term. What's your short-term ideas of how to jumpstart the economy and help the people who've been suffered by the pandemic?
Well, we've got a lot of the CARES Act funding monies, the $67 million. Through the HELP program, the administration is looking at giving $500 per qualified families. I'm in favor of increasing that to maybe $800. I mean, every little bit helps. Another thing I'm looking at, I think Sylvia brought it up earlier about the New Deal with Franklin Roosevelt. If we can use some of these monies for some jobs works programs, you know, you can hire some folks who are currently out of work to augment and help our county departments, whether it be admin work or additional park care, you know, people who can help take care of our parks, roads, etc. So sort of like a New Deal model, you know, as a stimulus, at least get people to work temporarily until times get better for them in their other jobs. So those are two ideas I have to help jumpstart the economy. But, you know, I think we've only hit the tip of the iceberg as far as the social problems right now, because once people's benefits start to run out, I think we need to focus on the mental health aspect. I mean, you're going to have a lot of depression that's currently there. That may escalate, domestic violence. I've heard that on the mainland, a lot of big cities, there's been an uptick in crime of, you know, burglaries and car break-ins because people need money. So we need to prepare ourselves for it. So if we can put some money in people's pockets, I think we can help to alleviate that concern.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I will pass this to the next person.
Okay.
Mike, aloha. Daniel again.
Hey, Daniel.
Hey, so you've been in office how many terms now? There was like 5. This is your 5th term.
Sixth term, yeah.
6th term.
Yeah,
Okay.
going on 6.
So you have
Yeah.
you have seen you've seen all of this transpire in a number of ways. So that experience is definitely honorable. Now, what have you seen in the past in this past term that you're looking forward to support in this upcoming next? Should you be brought back in?
Okay. Again, like I mentioned earlier, continuing my quest on seeing what we can do to alleviate the affordable housing crisis, jumpstarting our economy. Diversification, I think, is the key word. There was a term I heard the other day of a type of economy to promote. It's called a circular economy, where what you produce, then you can recycle. When I watched that NASA launch the other day, it was interesting how they said those booster rockets and a capsule are reusable. So I think what is manufactured or produced, we must look at ways of how it can be recycled and reused to minimize the amount of stuff we throw in our landfills.
So especially with the
so
circular economy, I just want to tap on that one. There's been talk about having a district agriculture Department of Ag rather than the state Department of Ag. Would you be in support of that, or no?
Yeah, I think Councilmember Sinenci is looking at doing that, and I'd be open to supporting it, provided, of course, if there's monies. But it can be done even without money for the time being. Once we get funding for it, then it can be implemented. I think Mr. Sinenci has a charter amendment for that. So I will be having a meeting on his item on June 23rd. So we'll be hearing it out, and we'll see where it goes from there if the council wants to put it on the ballot.
Gotcha. Because agriculture, when it comes to circular economy, that's a big piece when it comes to waste and waste management, as well as perhaps having some form of support for the farmers or for their equipment. Now, has it been considered with the circular economy to have perhaps like a co-op situation for farming equipment or supplies, things like this?
Yeah, I've heard that talked about, but I think that's a great idea because machinery is expensive, and for the independent farmer, that cost can be quite high. So if you have a co-op where you can rent the equipment, or people can share, at least the full burden of cost is not borne by just a single independent farmer.
Okay, so what? Thank you.
And that's a great example of how we need to diversify.
Right, totally. Along the same lines of that, diversifying and having the circular economy, as this lockdown begins to open up and we're looking at these changes, what other insights do you have from that past moving into the future, that you bring to the table, that how do you see of that experience that can help us in this situation?
Well, it's funny. During my first term on the council, I was on the council in 2001, and of course, we all know what happened on September 11th. And so we had an economic crisis in terms of the visitor industry. So at that time, I supported initiatives to work with the Maui Visitors Bureau, since tourism at that time was considered our top economic driver. So supporting the needs of small business, the visitor industry, because it's all a chain reaction. You don't have tourists coming in, it affects the small business. And so I would be open to looking at funding. Just this past budget session, I supported grants of $25,000 for independent farmers. I think initiatives like that, supporting grants, and also establishing victory gardens. I think that was something that happened during the war, World War II. So things like that, with the emphasis on agriculture. And again, mixing it with some of our visitors coming in. Now, we may not have as many visitors, but we heard the other day, just getting off that airplane, it may scare off people having to go through all those checks. I think we'll have more potentially. I think I see more high-end visitors versus the average income visitors. So, which is why I think the people who have the money from elsewhere, they're going to be looking for different experiences rather than just the traditional visitor experience. Tours of the kalo fields, for example, that might be part of that. That's the type of tourism that can help our small farmers. If the visitors want to come in and see how we operate, provided, of course, they're safe as well.
Right.
So and I think we need to make sure.
Go ahead. We need to make sure what?
Oh yeah, provided that they're safe. They're hopefully COVID-19 free.
Mm-hmm.
Is that's the thing with opening up, our islands again. We need to be very careful with. It's a double-edged sword because I think we are the lowest. We have the lowest rate of COVID-19, which actually may attract a lot of people to wanting to come to Hawaii because it seems safe, or it's very minimal. The risk of getting COVID-19 is small. So, ironically, that may be an attraction. A reason why more people may come here.
So you had mentioned earlier that in this diversity, in this diversifying, to bring in a bit more of an idea of Maui being a place for reverence and healing, and bringing in more things like focused healthcare professionals, or develop these public-private partnerships for growing the education here. Just real quickly in 30 seconds, can you maybe expound on that? Because it sounded like you had some insight there.
Yeah, because we're living longer now, the demand for health is certainly continuing to escalate. So why not along with growing agriculture, let's invest and grow our young people into the healthcare professions and if they can do it right here. And with the economic situation of many families, it may be difficult for them to send their son or daughter off to Oahu or the mainland for schooling. So if they have an interest in the healthcare professions, if you can get it here, why not? And they stay here. And I think instead of us having to always constantly trying to recruit out of state to get people to come here, if we can educate our young that are already living here, I think it's a win-win for us.
Very good. Thank you, Mike.
And, developing these partnerships with the state and private entities. So. Thanks, Daniel.
Mike, I have a question. Really, it has to do when we first started this whole cycle. We started off with looking at our department heads and an evaluation process. I was a little bit vocal in terms of the process that occurred. Mm-hmm. Again, I saw that the process had a lot to do with exposing people to a wide range of input from the community, but not really necessarily having the type of input that would be required to do a proper evaluation of managers. Are you looking at doing something different this next time around when we, I guess, coming up in 2 years, when we have that issue come up again, are you looking at something different this time around?
Well, I'll just say I'm open to it because admittedly, it was a brutal process this first time, with long hours of questioning. And I know you had a good suggestion. And, at the time, I guess maybe it's a new council. Maybe the members weren't quite ready for it. But, when we do have the 2022 mayoral elections, that's when I guess the administration either, the council will have to have a say in the new mayor or even the incumbent mayor's selections of directors. So I would be open if I'm on the council then to looking at a new process, more streamlined process for sure, because it was brutal. Brutal. But
I agree. It was brutal.
Oh man, it was for us and the nominees. Yep.
So just another question that I have certainly that has to do with this pandemic that we're facing, and what are your thoughts of the governor's assertion towards mandatory vaccines for both children and adults?
That's a slippery slope because, I believe a person has a right to what they want to put in their bodies or not. I don't know. It seems a little bit totalitarian to me, in my opinion. And I consider myself somewhat conservative, but when it comes to the government telling me you will take this, I don't know, because I'm afraid what next? They're going to tell us, put these chips in, insert these chips so they can find out what you're all about. I'm paranoid. You remember 1984, George Orwell, all that stuff? I read this book, The Late Great Planet Earth. Hal Lindsey was the author. And it talked about how the order of the world was going to change, where China was going to be the new power, then the United States and Russia would unite and would be allies. Of course, this is back in the 70s, and that was so far-fetched. Yeah, United States and Russia, we're going to put together. But, looking at what's transpiring lately, it's kind of scary. So, and thinking of Orwell's book, 1984, Big Brother's Watching, I get a little paranoid. So I don't like the mandatory vaccination, on a personal basis, because to me, it's important a person should have that right. If they can find other means from having a vaccination to be disease-free, I'm all for that. But I just don't like this idea of the government telling you this is what you're going to put in your body, like it or not. So.
Thank you very much for that response, Mike.
Yeah.
It's appreciated, I'm sure, by a lot of our viewers also. Now, anyone else has any final question for Mike? We're getting Bruce. Why don't you do the last question, and then we'll wrap up.
So, Mike, in order for things to happen on the council, they happen because one of the council members decides to champion the cause, not just go along with a vote, but really do the research, do what it takes, and makes it happen. During this upcoming year, what can we count on for you that you're going to champion and see through and give the push and the stimulus and the vision to make happen?
Okay. Well, one thing that I'm currently championing right now is a proposed charter amendment I have to separate the Department of Housing Human Concerns and create a separate housing division. My thinking is that if we create a separate housing division, then there's more focus on housing itself. Maybe even creating a housing zone. I think Mike Williams and I had been talking about that, Stan Franco. So I think that's one thing that I would champion. But ultimately, you need 5 votes on the council for anything to pass. So you can be the initiator of something, but you as an elected official, you have to make sure your message is sound, your legislation close up any loopholes, any legal loopholes. So you need sound legislation. It's like, again, if I could go back to the plastic bag ban, there are a lot of pukas in the beginning, but we modeled that legislation after the Bay Area's legislation. So we did a lot of outreach and education, and then we got a lot of buy-in from the business community who resisted at first. So that's what I would be looking at with anything that I would champion is do the homework first. Sometimes when you rush legislation, it can be, the results can turn out poor for you. So if you do your homework, you do the research. And do a lot of outreach with the community, because any candidate or elected official that tells you that he or she has all the answers, to me, that's buyer beware, because a lot of my legislation happened because of the outreach I did with the community. Like the plastic bag ban, I had a lot of help from the Sierra Club, Hannah Bernard, and the outdoor lighting ordinance. And same thing with the Affordable Housing Fund. I got a lot of help from people in the real estate community. So I like legislation where there's a lot of meeting of the minds, because then that's successful.
So I've heard one thing you're willing to champion. Are you have any others that you're going to focus and champion and make happen during this coming year?
This coming year or the next term? Next term,
we'll say then.
Okay, next term. Okay. Well, let's see. I had mentioned to you about the use of recycled water. That's one thing I'd like to champion in light of what happened with the Lahaina injection wells. That's something I'd love to work closely with all the environmental groups on. And of course, on the other spectrum, the 201H affordable housing, to increase that commitment from the developer for affordable housing units. So those are 2 things that I have in mind for next term. And of course, if there's anything else you or any member of the public would like me to look at. One thing that I'm looking at champion right now is a social host ordinance. It would tighten the law for parents that hold parties for underage, well, I don't call it underage drinking, but when you have these teenage parties after graduation, there's a lot of underage drinking. And the law that I'm looking at tightening the law or the penalties, that if you do this as a parent, this is the risk you take. It's a lot like what Councilmember Sugimura did with the towing bill, where now if you get caught for DUI, now they tow your car as well. So I'm sort of the same concept with this social host bill. So parents just need to be more, responsible and mindful of what their kids are doing. So yeah, because there's been too many tragedies with related to underage drinking. And I'm working with the underage youth coalition, drinking coalition. So those are some things that I'm looking at right now.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I get a little long-winded and start going off into all kinds of tangents, so forgive me.
It's okay.
No, Mike, you haven't been long-winded, and actually, we've been at this for an hour right now. So again, thank you so much for taking the time and
My
really,
pleasure.
being part of this, a way of really utilizing our democracy. This way, our whole community can be informed about all the different candidates and where they stand. And so before we end though, Mike, I would like you to just let people know how they can get in touch with you, and if they're interested in supporting your campaign or supporting you funding wise, how they can go about doing that.
Okay, great. I have, my mailing address, Friends of Mike Molina, Post Office Box 1303, Makawao 96768 by slow mail. You can call me direct. My cell phone's 808-264-4859. I have a website, mjmforcouncil@gmail.com, or I have actually two, mjm.mauicounty@gmail.com. So, or you can just call me at my office at the county council. I do have my staff monitoring the phone calls, so I'm always open, no matter whether we agree or disagree. I love hearing from you, and I've been through the wars. I've been praised and pounded at the same time. So, plus I've been married for 28 years, so I've had a lot of battlefield experience. Don't tell my wife I said that, but she's a big part of my life.
Thank you so much, Mike, for being part of this again, and again for your service on the county council for so many years, really. So thank you again for your support.
Thank you. My pleasure. And thanks for inviting me. I appreciate talking to you all. Daniel, Sylvia, and God, having a break free, Bruce. I know, Bruce. I know it's been a long day for me as well. Thanks, you guys, for doing this. And however you feel about me, no matter what happens, I just enjoy the one-to-one conversation, because it's all about the reciprocal learning. We learn from each other.